Hello, and welcome to the Business History Conference book series. My name is Paula de la Cruz Fernandez, and I am the BHC's digital editor. Today, June 30th, 2025, we will be interviewing Dr. Israel Solares, author of the book Underground Leviathan, Corporate Sovereignty and Mining in the Americas, published around a year ago by University of Nevada Press. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
This interview is being live streamed on YouTube, and I am monitoring that channel in case there are any questions that come that way. And then the video will be also available on our YouTube channel after the interview is over. Today, again, I have the pleasure to host Israel Solares, who is a Mexican scholar from Xochimilco in Mexico City. He holds a BA and a master's in economics from the UNAM, as well as a master's and a PhD in history from el Colegio de México. He is currently an associate researcher, professor at the Department of Mathematical Modeling of Social Systems, Institute for the Research in Applied Mathematics and Systems at the Mexican National University, the UNAM. Underground Leviathan is his first book, and he now studies the interactions between the development of technology, capitalism, and the university system in North America in the 20th century. He co-edited a book with Edward Beatty, and actually with a contribution by one of our hosts today, Mark Hendrickson, and on the global history of engineers. The title is Engineered World, and it will be published by MIT Press in November of this year. And I just heard a little secret that it already has a cover, and it could be actually searched for on the web. Today, our interview hosts will be Dr. Susie Porter and Dr. Mark Hendrickson. Susie Porter is professor of history and gender studies at the University of Utah. Her research interests include labor, class relations, and the history of women and gender in Mexico. Porter is the author of 2 award-winning books, Working Women in Mexico City, Public Discourses and Material Conditions, 1879 to 1931, and From Angel to Office Worker, Middle Class Identity and Female Consciousness in Mexico, 1890 to 1950, and both also published by el Colegio de Michoacán in Spanish. And her forthcoming book, which I can wait to read that one also, is Señorita Telefonista, which examines sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and class identities in early 20th century Mexico City. And Dr. Mark Hendrickson, who is an associate professor of history at the University of California in San Diego. His recent publications explored how American mining engineers and economic geologists working abroad since the 1880s helped shape the development of 20th century American capitalism, science, and foreign policy. He is currently working on a book that uses the element antimony to explore some of these same issues. Mark recently held an Andrew Mellon Foundation New Directions Fellowship, which provided him with the opportunity to study aspects of the mining industry with scholars at Colorado School of Mines and Michigan Technological University. So welcome everyone again. And I will start with the first question just to kind of start a conversation with asking Israel to please tell us more about yourself, about your career, and maybe about how this book came about.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you for the host. Also, it's very special for me to be also like doing this with Susie and Mark because they sponsored some research stays in Utah, and Mark, and in general, they have been like just really great mentors throughout the years. So really appreciate that I get to discuss this with them too. I am an economist, as you said, and I was always interested in the kind of like global capitalism, I think. And in doing the PhD at El Colegio de México, I really wanted to do something, some sort of global history. In particular, I was interested in multinationals. I was always intrigued by these organizations that could cross borders, and I was always kind of dissatisfied by the way of how it was always thought. Like most of the time, we think of them just as nation states, one nation state going to another, and so on. So I wanted to do something more broad, and actually, it was from that with my advisor. Aurora Gomez Galvarriato, we visited an archive in Pachuca, Hidalgo, which is a little bit of north of Mexico City, and it's a very historic mining site. And they have an archive there that actually right now is kind of struggling. It's a private archive of Compañía Real del Monte Pachuca. But they have, I don't know, like 300 years of archive, and they have part of the history of the U.S. company is there because in 1906, this company from the U.S. that was incorporated in Maine buys the mines, the historic silver mines in Pachuca. So they had, which is in business history, is usually hard to get into internal corporate archives. It's not as easy. And I saw that there was that opportunity, but then also I looked around in the U.S. and because the company went bankrupt, the archive kind of was spread out in different places, internal files of the company. So I mean, it was just in my mind, it was just easy. Oh, I'll just go to these 15 different places to do some archive work. So yeah, like the enthusiasm of PhD, and that's how the project of the book came about, and it was great because I got to know many places and also great people. But yeah, basically, in a nutshell, that's how it started.
Thank you, Israel. I wanted to maybe ask a question. As you said, Mark and I have been, accompanying you for a long time and have know these histories. But for the people who might be listening, if you might set the stage a little bit for someone who doesn't know the U.S. mining company or the Compañía de Real del Monte Pachuca, just to give us an overview maybe of this a brief overview of this history. What are we talking about in concrete terms?
Yeah, thank you. So in Pachuca, in Mexico, which I say is a little bit north of Mexico City, there is a little debate there, but there is this process of silver extraction that was developed mostly there, or like at least on an industrial scale, it was developed there, which is called amalgamation, which uses mercury to extract silver and gold too from ore. So it was developed there, and actually that district was kind of at the most the most technologically advanced extraction process was always there for actually hundreds of years. And in 18th century, it became very prosperous, especially, but I mean, it comes from 16th century, but like in 18th century, it became a very prosperous place. But then already late 18th century started a little bit of decay, but they had this relationship actually with one of the first, I think it's the first technical school in the Western Hemisphere, which is El Real Seminario de Minas, which is based in Mexico City, which was training mining engineers. But then after the independence, the mines were abandoned when when you abandon mine, there is some flooding. So it took until the middle of 19th century, and after a lot of investment actually from British capital, that the mines were working again, and then again with an industrial process um, of amalgamation, especially producing silver. Then it was more prosperous, like the 1860s, something like that. And then more or less at the same time, there is this boom in mining in Utah in late 19th century. At the beginning, when the Brigham Young gets to the Salt Lake Valley, they actually find minerals quite early, but they kind of hide it. So I think in particular Brigham Young was a little hesitant to promote kind of a rush into Utah, which would contradict or like would be in competition with the Mormon population, which was mostly agrarian. And there is this whole old history actually of conflicts over territory between mining and agriculture. So so it was kind of hidden, but then after there were the Mormon Wars, and then the Transcontinental Railway, and the telegraph lines, and actually some of the soldiers that are stationed in the Salt Lake Valley or in the mountains in the Uquiri Range, they find minerals again. So there is a lot of people of non-Mormons that get to the valley, and one of them is called Liberty Holden, and with others they start producing, they start extracting minerals and metals from the Bingham Canyon, so it becomes very prosperous again, especially silver too. And in Utah also there is this the Park City is this big place where they're extracting a lot of silver as well. They become very prosperous. He comes from Cleveland, and his son Albert Holden, he studies in MIT and Harvard. He's more of a technician, and he takes over the company really in the last years of 19th century. In 1899, he forms the United States Mining Company, and it starts consolidating some of the mines. Also, there is a drop in prices in silver, so consolidation just makes sense. Growing bigger because profits on a small scale are harder. There's a lot of competition, so he starts buying a lot of little claims. And then it starts growing, and then until and it starts actually buying mines outside Utah. In 1906, Albert Holden is still in his 30s, and then they become multinational. He kind of leads the process to become multinational with this historic site, these mines from Pachuca. There is kind of an inflow of U.S. capital into the mining sector in Mexico in those years, in the early 20th century. And 1906, they buy the Pachuca mines. And just a little before, in 1903, they had figured out how to use a new process, which is called cyanidation, to extract silver and gold from ore that actually increases yield by many times. And it's developed for gold in Scotland first, and then the transition for silver, and especially Mexican silver, wasn't as smooth. But then by 1906, the experiments are working, so that's why they decide to invest, and they transform this for this process that had been going on for over 200 years, changes from amalgamation to cyanidation, and that's the beginning of the story of the multinational company that it's called. Then it changes the name. It's incorporated in Maine. It's called United States Smelter Refining and Mining Company. But then everyone just calls it U.S. company because also a lot of subsidiaries, it's U.S. something, U.S. Fuel Company, U.S. Railroad Company, and so on. So it's everyone just calls it U.S. company.
And one of the things that I've always appreciated about your work is that it contains a lot of complexities, right? You're looking underground, above ground, across national boundaries, but within corporations, at chaos and attempts at organization. So I think that the people who pick up your book are going to find a lot of complexity in the way you approach this subject, which is to foreground a question that's sort of more focused, which is, what would you say are the central arguments that the book makes? The maybe the sort of takeaway points that you'd like the audience to hear.
Yeah. So in a way, I was just kind of obsessed by the story of this very complex, these different places interacting, and the underground part was very funny because for a lot of the research stays or the places that I was, I was living in basements. So it was when my partner met me, Kristen, she dedicated the book to it. And she's like, well, he lives in the basement. Like he all talks about underground. My office at Nordheim was on a basement too. So everything was kind of underground. And so it was just like, oh, the title of the book was there waiting to be picked. But so in a way, it was a very simple question that I approached this research with, which was, what is this corporation? Like, what is really, not what were the effects, or like kind of like it was just like a very simple thing, like what is, how does it work? Like these places are so different. How is that this corporation can incorporate this complexity, manage it, and then have like a simple balance sheet with profits or metals produced, no? So I think that comes to the point of the central argument. So the central argument of the book is that we have to think corporations and multinational corporations as these complex entities that have not only they are in different places and managing different kinds of ore. Actually, the complexity of the ore is the thing itself that has to be managed with. But that's to be dealt with. But also with different levels of planning and management that has to be dealt with. So I was thinking in a political economy of the corporation itself, with an emphasis on the political aspect as well. Also, I mean, the economy is very important, but the political aspect for me was also central because there are some approaches that it's, corporation is only profit, no? And then some of the political histories of corporations is really the relationship with nation states and the political negotiations. So we have some examples, for instance, that we have a lot of production on United Fruit Company, and then you have stories of the United Fruit Company almost in every country they were at. But then it becomes again a nation state. So the central argument of the book is, well, in order to understand these organizations, we have to think them as a global entity. And in particular, I found it compelling to think of them as a sovereign entity. There's growing literature on corporate sovereignty. I'm thinking, I don't know, Joshua Barkan or Philip Stern that just published a new book, Empire Inc., which deal with these corporations that have explicit sovereign rights over different territories. But in a way, my story is about a corporation that didn't have. It's not like the East India Company or those examples, but didn't have legally a sovereign claim over no territory. But how can we think still corporate sovereignty more like a broad range of practices that corporations do in reality. And then you have some examples that they actually can claim legal sovereignty over some spaces, but then a lot of corporations can do it non-formally. So the central argument, I guess, of the book is to think that, to just think of corporations that way, of multinational corporations that way, and then also kind of move the focus for real from if we're moving the focus from shareholders to managers, then we also should move the focus, not only focus on profits or profits for shareholders, but also the different volitions or the different interests that managers can have in corporations, and to make them stable and to make them grow and so on. So that would be kind of like the theoretical aspect of the general argument of the book. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's really such a pleasure to read this book and to see how the project has progressed over time. And you kind of frame this as it's a simple question, right? What about this company? You know, what can we learn about it? But the story that you tell is anything but simple. I mean, the amount of research, the travels that you've talked about that you did, the archives that you visited, it's a broad story. It's, to use a mining term, there's almost a refractory nature to it. And you know, at some point as an author, you've got to give order to that story. And the way that you do that is by drawing on Hobbes, right, and Leviathan, and particularly the second part of the title there, you know, the matter, form, and power. And you come back to each of those three things twice over the course of the book. And I was kind of wondering, you know, how did that come about? Right? You're doing all this research, and eventually you've got to impose order on this story. And how did you draw on that sort of theoretical way of approaching the history of a mining company, kind of putting it into conversation with this classic work? And then also, when did that happen? Was it early? Was it late? You know, when did you come to that? So,
yeah, thank you. No, I was I think that during the research in the PhD, I was trying to also give order to this. I mean, each story for me was just very fascinating, these local stories. And then there is also actually in every place that I went, in Alaska, in Utah, in Pachuca, and even in East Chicago, in Indiana, and so on, there were bits and pieces of memory of the firm, and they knew like there was something else. All the stories were local, right? So for me, it was like, oh, how can we really think of these different levels, these different ores? And I was finding actually same characters in different places too. So that was just fascinating. But then it is easy to just get lost on it, right? This complicated story. And one of the objects of the archives that gave a little bit of coherence for what I was trying to tell was actually the blueprints of the firm. Like they had blueprints in every archive. I found a blueprint of the plant or the mines, and different blueprints at different levels. So that gave me an idea of, you know, they are doing these very complex things, but then if you layer the blueprints, you can see there is a system to it, right? So actually during the PhD, I was talking more about this planning aspect of it, and this political power, and I was like trying to understand these different documents that were interrelated to each other. And it was after I finished my PhD that I tried to give. Well, I was still thinking on how, in theory, with not just objects of the archives, but like in dialogue with other works, we could think of this firm. So actually, it was after the PhD that I started thinking on Leviathan, and so it was actually I rewrote the book. I didn't just translate, or I didn't just copy parts of the dissertation, but I actually rewrote the whole thing, and I incorporate more research. Also, all this stays and in Indiana, in Boston, in San Diego, and really the matter, form, power. This trilogy, these three aspects really fit in with already the structure of the chapters that I was thinking, or the different levels. So the matter being the material aspect of it, the material in the sense of the objects like the hard rock, but also the scars in the lungs of the workers that could have they had diseases because of industrial mining. So this matter aspect, and that also relate a lot with the science behind mining. Then the form of the firm was mostly focused on the organizational aspect of the firm, and also the different models of organization of the multinational, the different relationships between managers and engineers. Also, I found that engineers were super central to the firm, and they had this kind of engineering mindset, this planning mindset, and so they themselves they put it on the files. They already did the metaphors between working in the mine and dealing with that complexity of the ores, and dealing with the complexity of managing a multinational organization. And then the power of the firm, that's kind of the labor history, like of the firm. That's if we think of the Leviathan as a sovereign, then what would be the subjects? That was basically the question. And the subjects would be the workers of the firm. So the power aspect of the firm was this labor history of the firm, which was also quite interesting. Also, the subjects, they dealt with the company as a political entity. They would negotiate on a local level, but then over time, they would start to build alliances on a national level, international level, and they would coordinate. So I found just very, very useful to see these three levels, and that allowed me to organize the different stories that I was telling from a business perspective, but also ecological perspective, political perspective, labor. And no, I just thought it was very, very useful. And as I say, like part of it is just this recent conversation on corporate sovereignty. And then, well, if we're going to talk about corporate sovereignty, we should talk about hopes. But then also, if you look at the history of corporations since Hobbes, but also Edmund Burke, they were talking about the corporation as a commonwealth, as this political entity that transcended national boundaries and transcended the sovereignty of empire and nation and so on. So that's how the structure of the book came about. Also, it allowed me to tell the different stories. So for those who haven't read it, I go over these 3 points twice on the book, but then I also, each chapter is divided by different spaces. So each subtitle is focused on a different space in this universe of the locations of the firm. And that actually, this kind of like very schematic structure of hopes, like matter, form, power, allow me to have this more fragmented histories interacted with each other, and make also, without taking out this rich history, local history, because another risk of telling like a global history of a multinational corporation is that it ends up being the history of the headquarters of the firm and what they deal with and the information they get from the exterior and so on. So I didn't want to do that either. So yeah, I think that's how it came about, the title, the structure of the book as well.
That's super interesting. It's a great answer to that question. There's so many different places where your book makes an intervention or a contribution, and you and I have talked a lot about the importance of engineers, mining engineers, and economic geologists in particular, in other contexts. I would just, among those areas where you're making an intervention would be in sort of the field of the history of capitalism, and I was wondering, when you're looking at mining engineers and economic geologists, what role do you think they played in sort of the emergence of kind of 20th century global capitalism?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think that they are heavily understudied. Mining engineers is it's the first, or the really, I mean, you usually had in history civil engineers and military engineers, right? That was like the two aspects of engineering, and then mining engineers emerged like kind of the first more openly economic oriented engineers that didn't necessarily had to do with some form of statehood. And they grow very rapidly. I mean, there is a long tradition of them, but especially since 18th century, they start growing in numbers. And some of the colleges that are teaching mining engineering are very important. Already in 19th century, Freiburg School of Mines. Like, I mean, in Mexico, I think in Latin America in general, like the role of Alexander von Humboldt. And he was trained as in School of Mines, no? And so this scientific also lens that he had was very common also for a lot of geologists and mining engineers from late 18th century throughout 19th century, like looking for coal, for instance. Then you find fossils and paleontology. It becomes important because they're looking for ores and in particular coal. But so I think in the development of what you would think of already since the Industrial Revolution, or like the whole thing of the Industrial Revolution, they are very, very central, creating or finding the energy that it's fueling the Industrial Revolution. And then if you think about like the Second Industrial Revolution or late 19th century, they become central again. And it's not only coal, then also it becomes oil, right, later on, but then also these ores and industrial minerals that they have to find everywhere to build, to have steel, to have copper, for electricity, to have steel for buildings, to have all these different things, like silver, for instance, in the development of photography. So all these industrial metals, and they're becoming industrial, they need these huge amounts of matter going into the system, into capitalism. And then engineers, mining engineers and geologists and metallurgists, they become very, very central in this emergence of the science and technology, more focused capitalism of the 20th century. And you can see that in specific actors too. At some point in the 1920s, actually quite a few of heads of state had some background in mining engineering, from Hoover to Pascual Ortiz Rubio to Mackenzie, to many in Colombia too. So they had also this experience of moving around a lot and planning this circulation of matter, of technicians, of labor, of technology between different spaces. So in the early 20th century, when there are these pressures for planning, they are the first that, they are very central in these planning efforts in the 20th century. And so like you have it in Hoover in the US. It's very classical, this mine engineer that actually at some point was a manager of, I mean, from London, but manager of mines in Mexico as well, and so on. And also, they become central in the interactions after the First World War with the Soviet Union. Development of this push, this 5-year plans with Stalin, and the construction of the Gulag system. It has some roots in the circulation of mining, then mechanical tool engineers that they start spreading everywhere into Soviet Union and then into Europe and so on. And in particular, one very interesting story that the US company is part of is the expansion of US trained mining engineers and geologists everywhere. One of the examples, one of the manager of the foreign exploration company in the US company, Sidney Jennings, he had experience in South Africa, for instance. And his brother was like a big mining engineer that had a lot of experience in South Africa. And then Sidney, he becomes the head of the exploration department and also the dealing with the expansion internationally of the US company. And they are also, I mean, at the same time that he's debating in Boston, for instance, of the future of mining engineering and mining in the US and so on, they can be debating labor practices, for instance, in South Africa, but also dealing with the Mexican Revolution in Mexico, and so on. So they have this kind of like global view of themselves, and that has to do everything that is very related to the role that they are occupying in these mining multinational firms.
That's great. Yes, just one more follow-up question, and Susie, maybe I'll turn it over to you. And think about the significance of that argument. We think about the underinvestment in mining engineering and economic geology in the United States since the 1970s. I mean, the significance of this group, as you suggest, I think is really, really something. And you talked about the idea that they form a global network, right? And these same sort of characters show up a number of different times in all these crazy places, and how interesting that was. In addition to that, there's also a story about a changing relationship between business, or mining business in particular, academia and government, and how that relationship changes over time. It's got that one too has a lot of contemporary significance. If you're to step back and kind of think about those different bodies and how they relate to one another over the course of the 20th century, how would you characterize the changing nature of that relationship between those groups or institutions?
Yeah, no, it's that's another that was another discovery for me. This deep relationship with academia and with universities in particular. I mean, the MIT, well, there is David Noble, America by Design, tells this story of the emergence of MIT at this kind of this technical school, but then it becomes kind of like a consultant body of researchers, and then the relationship of the university with corporations in particular in Boston area was central to the constitution of the MIT itself. And then the MIT was super influential as well then in a lot of developments in firms, within firms. Some of the firms and the US company had their research and development labs in MIT, inside of the university itself. So there is this back and forth relationship. In particular, geology professors, they would go into surveying for these different mining companies. And I tell the story in the book of Valdemar Lindgren, and I was just fascinated by these reports of Lindgren, of the geologists when they are surveying, because they have this projection in time. So they tell the story, and they tell a story of territories from they're like, oh, these rocks were formed this in this eon, in this eon. Like, they have to describe, they have to tell a story, and they have to tell a story for the company, for the company to decide whether to invest or not, looking at the future. So in a way, the nature of what they're doing, these consultants, these scientists, the nature of what they're doing, both in science but then also in consulting, has to do a lot with the economic prospects of different territories. So it becomes ingrained, like, in their practice all the time, to tell a story, to see feasibility, to look into the future, and see what can be done. And so there is this, in a way, this very economic relationship between mining firms and universities, where the firms would invest or give money to different consultants for different kinds of work, but then also they would install labs there, and then some of the students would go to the installations, to the plants, and learn by doing, which was very, very important in the expansion of the Anglo-American engineers into the world, that they were very, very practical, hands-on. And then they would come back with that knowledge into the university. So, and sometimes they would even bring the matter itself. If you go to the Natural Museum, the geology part of the museum in Harvard, you'll find a lot of rocks from Mexico, a lot of ores from Mexico, that were part of this. If you think about it, it was only natural, this circulation of, they would bring silver from Mexico, or gold, or antimony. Actually, I think, no, Mark, you know about that, but also antimony into the US. But then also they would bring, the companies will donate these pretty ores, these ores that they have these very complex structures, and they would put in their museums, and then it would be part of their knowledge, of their surveys, of their practices in science as well. So so you would have this back and forth relationship, and sometimes it was just very, very explicit, as I say, having a lab in MIT. But then also, for instance, Richard Strong, which was the head of the School of Tropical Diseases in Harvard, he was always consulting for a lot of firms to have doctors going to the different parts of the world that these firms were going. So he was also the head of the medicine department at United Fruit, and he would go on practices into Peru, into different places. His students would go and try to tackle diseases in mining camps in Mexico and so on. And there was a circulation also with the state. Then especially after the First World War, the state becomes a great sponsor of these technical schools. These consultants, they start doing work for the state, for these different services. I mean, in particular, in mining is the US Geological Service, that there is a lot of circulation with them, but then also the Bureau of Mines, the Bureau of Labor, with the development also of industrial medicine. So there is a very rich history that I found. Actually, as I said, the U.S. company was incorporated in Maine, and then it had the headquarters in Boston. So many companies were headquartered in Boston, and they would have access to these different scholars, these different departments, these universities, and that was central to their place. And I have a set of characters that are not formally in the firm, but they are sporadically, or sometimes they go into the firm. They do some consulting for the firm, or they actually are evaluating the effects of the the practices of the firm in these different territories. So I talked about Valdemar Lindgren, in particular Richard Strong. Alice Hamilton is a great character. It was a great discovery of industrial medicine for me, and she was the first female tenure professor, I think, in Harvard Medical School. So and just a great character. It's one of my favorite characters in the book. But they were central to what the company was doing. They had to deal with the company. They were also part of translators between what the company was doing and the state was requiring from the companies and so on. So I don't know. Yeah, it was a changing relationship, but then it kind of evolved from some relationship to very, very integrated relationship by the mid-19th century, that you have really this big system of interactions between companies, consulting bodies in universities, and then the state. Yeah.
We've all heard the phrase "follow the money," and I think that our conversation here has shown a lot of the ways that works in the history that you're telling, that money moves across state and national boundaries, that money circulates among shareholders, the investment of money changes the surface of the earth and beneath the earth. But I thought of another riff on follow the money is follow the waste, follow the what's left behind. And I really appreciate that aspect of this history that you're telling. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what we learned from following the waste. It occurs to me that again brings us above the ground and below the ground, outside of bodies, inside of bodies, in one country and another country. Your epilogue tells the story of the US company's retreat from Mexico and what it left behind. I wonder if you might just reflect on what this history tells us when we follow the waste.
Yeah, thank you. Great question, Susie. And actually, when I was in Utah, I was talking with Susie about what was I finding in the archives in Utah. And one of the things is that I actually, it took me a while. And I was looking for the Union archives, really, in Utah, and I wasn't able to find them. And then I found them later in Colorado, actually. I found later the information of the unions in Salt Lake City in Colorado. But I was kind of frustrated because I had this plan that I was going to find a lot of information about labor, and I just wasn't finding it. But I was finding a lot of complaints actually from neighbors. And I was telling this to Susie, and Susie actually studies labor, but then she said, like, well, if you're finding this, it might be worth it if you really look into this, like look at the ecological aspect of this. And actually looking at the ecological aspect of it, it really, the part of the matter, the material aspect of it became clearer, because I had to study also how are they really extracting this lead. Lead was the main metal that they were extracting from the Oquirrh Range, close Salt Lake Valley. And so it became a story of understanding what sulfur did, like what the burning of lead implied, and the story of the territories around. Another thing that was interesting for me was that as also we already said, the ores are this complex natural occurrence of different elements, and to process each one, you have to have different processes. So as I said, in Mexico, it was cyanidation, which uses cyanide, which is a compound of carbon and nitrogen, to extract the metals, the silver and gold. In Utah, it's something different. You have to really kind of roast. It's a little rough, but like you have to roast the ore so it oxidizes the metal and then it drops, and then you get it refined. But in order to do that, that means that you have to break this complex ore and extract one thing or two things from it. And then most of the other things, you have to get rid of. That's an economic decision, because sometimes you can reprocess and actually get some of those. And if they have any economic value, you can, in some cases, get them too. But then most of the ore is non-valuable mineral. It's non-valuable elements. So what do you do with that? Actually that stays in the territories. That is rarely move around that much. So in the case of Pachuca, in Hidalgo, you can see there are still mountains of processed or crushed rock tailings that were already processed, and then you have to put them somewhere. And in the case of Utah as well, so that is like something that you have to deal with in the ground, tailings. And a lot of the maps that I found had, they had this maps of where these rocks, this crushed ore that you're taking from the ground, where do you put it elsewhere in the ground? You're digging something, you have to put the dust elsewhere. And then another part, it goes into the air and into the water. So in the case of cyanidation, it uses a lot of water. So once you process the ore, you take out the sand, but then the water, you have to drop it somewhere. And that has traces of cyanide as well. And there is a lot of technology. Actually, the story that I tell in the case of Pachuca is how also the conflicts with different communities shapes what the technology that the company is using to retain, control the waste of cyanide. And then cyanide becomes scarce as well, so it becomes more expensive. So they have an incentive to also try to recover that cyanide and to not just release it. But then there is a lot of conflicting rights. Also, it is not only cyanide, for instance, but you will have other metals sometimes also in that water. And in the case of Utah, the roasting, that means that you're burning something, so that goes into the air. So you have these very long smokestacks that dominate the landscape, and they are releasing a lot of sulfur into the sky, but other things as well. And then sometimes, when things are hot, they tend to be more volatile, but then they cool down and then they drop. So some other elements would drop in the neighboring areas in Utah, and this for the promised land for the Mormons. They were supposed to make that the ground produce a lot. Then the crops are not working. So that has a lot of implications in the context of the Mormon settlers in the Utah Valley, but then also in the case of indigenous communities around the mountains in Pachuca, in Mexico, during the Mexican Revolution, which is an agrarian revolution and an indigenous revolution. So I was following those conflicts, and I come to this. I was having a little trouble understanding how to frame this expanding waste of the company into the territories. So one of the things is this idea of invisible limits that comes from like the limits of the firm, the nature of the firm, which comes from business history. But then there is this other idea that comes from more like a Hobbesian tradition of this state of exception, this state where there is a political body, but then there is just direct power that has no boundaries in a way. So I thought of it as more like a space of exception. That's the title of chapter 6. This is spaces that the company is not there. They don't own the land. The people that are living there and producing there are not working for the company, so they're not the subjects of the company neither. And yet they experience the company, and they experience the power of the firm. And it's a more, I mean, it's really real. Like people see things dying, so in a way it's just really brutal. Like they see this, that horse just died, no, or these crops are burned. But in a way it's more difficult to prove as well. It becomes very, very difficult to prove that these things are actually happening. So it's a way of exercising power without being there. Even though the company, they have these maps where they can see where the smoke is going and all of that. So that's another part of the story of following the waste. And then also that waste stays. It survives the company. That's another thing. It stays there for a way longer time than most of these companies, and it's still like over time the company gets forgotten, but then the waste is still there. And these real aspects of the power of the company can transcend the company, not only the boundaries in that moment of the plots that the company actually owned, but then over time. And so, I mean, there's still a lot of communities are dealing with these effects in East Chicago, which is actually really recently. They had to, a lot of people have to move out from this the wasting sites of the US-led company, the division of the company that was there in East Chicago. But then you also had diseases in Huasca, in Mexico. Sometimes years later, bees will start to die in the Salt Lake Valley because that accumulates in the ground, and that it's incorporated. So yeah, so that's what you can see from following the waste. This other aspect of the mining story.
It's a fact I live with every day. The air I breathe is filled with arsenic that is evaporating from the Salt Lake, that comes in part from the water that was dumped through the mining process. So that's a very real concrete history for me. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Paula.
Thank you, everyone. That was really great. And I think this is a good time to wrap up. We've discussed the book by Israel Solares today, and I recommend you going to the link and the description here in the YouTube video I will leave the link to the book, and if you can get it, that would be fantastic. And we'll see you next time with the BHC book series.
Thank you so much,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.